The hospice nurse called me at 4:47 in the morning. She said, "Adelaide, your father is asking for you. I think this might be the time. How quickly can you get here?" I was already awake. I had been awake for most of the night. I had been staying at a small inn 11 miles from my father's house in the Hudson Valley, where my father had been in home hospice for 6 weeks, and where my brother Wendell and my sister Constance had also been staying, in rooms down the hall from mine. I called both of them. I was at my father's house by 5:23. The sun was not yet up. The driveway was lined with the cedar trees my mother had planted in 1989. My father had not, in 14 years since my mother had died, taken down a single one of those trees. The cedars had grown 18 feet in 14 years. They were the first thing you saw when you turned onto the property. They were, my father had said once, the reason he had been able to keep living in the house after my mother was gone. He had said it casually, the way my father said most things, but I had heard him. I had been the daughter who heard the things my father said casually. I had been hearing them my entire life. I parked the car. I walked up the steps. The hospice nurse, whose name was Dilys, opened the door. She said, "Adelaide, he has been waiting." I said, "Where is Florencia?" She said, "She left at 11 last night. She said she had to be at her sister's. She has not been back." I nodded. I went into my father's bedroom. He was awake. He was very small in the bed by then. He looked at me. He smiled. He took my hand. He said, "Adelaide, did you bring it?" I said, "Yes, Dad. I have it in the car. Wendell and Connie are 20 minutes behind me. They are bringing the rest." He said, "Good." I sat down in the chair beside his bed. I had been sitting in that chair for 6 weeks. I had memorized the way the light came in through the window over his shoulder in the early morning when the sun cleared the cedars. I had been waiting for this morning. I had not, until I sat down, understood that I was ready for it. My father squeezed my hand. He said, "Adelaide,
Tell me one more time."
are you certain about Florencia?"
I said, "Dad."
"I am certain." He said, "Then we are going to do it the way we discussed. I am ready. I love you."
I said, "Dad."
"I love you too." Wendell walked in at 5:44. Constance walked in at 5:46. We sat with our father for the next 4 hours. He died at 9:51 in the morning. 11 days earlier, his wife Florencia had filed for divorce, hoping that she could collect alimony before the will took effect. She had not, when she filed, known that my father had a prenuptial agreement. She had not, when she filed, known that the three of us had read it. She had also not known, when she filed, what we had been preparing for the previous 11 weeks. She found out at 11:14 that morning, when her own attorney called to inform her that her divorce petition had been rendered moot and that the estate she had been planning to fight was, in fact, an estate she had no claim to. Welcome back to Broken Relations Stories. If you are new here, this channel is for the children of widowers who watched a stranger move into their father's house and waited, calmly, for the paperwork to settle the question. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, tell me where you are watching from, and let me take you back to the year my mother died, which was 2011 when I was 28, my brother was 26, and my sister was 23, and our father, who had been the steady center of our family for our entire lives, became, in 14 months, a man we no longer fully recognized. My name is Adelaide Norton. I am 41 years old. My brother Wendell is 39. My sister Constance is 36. Our father, Whitaker Norton, died 2 months ago at the age of 71. He was a retired surgeon. He had practiced cardiothoracic surgery for 38 years at a hospital in Westchester. He had been good at it. He had been the kind of surgeon who other surgeons consulted. He had operated on a senator in 2003, a famous orchestra conductor in 2007, and the youngest son of a country music singer in 2011, 3 months before our mother died. He had also operated on hundreds of regular people in his career, including my best friend's father in 1998, who had walked his own daughter down the aisle 6 years later because of a quintuple bypass my father had performed. My father had been, by every account I have ever heard from anyone who knew him professionally, a calm, exacting, kind man. He had been the same man at home. He had been a father who showed up. He had been a husband who, for 37 years, had loved my mother in a quiet, daily, constant way. He had not, until November of 2011, been a man who made impulsive decisions about anything. In November of 2011, my mother died. She was 64. The cancer she had been fighting for 2 years caught up with her. She died on a Thursday afternoon in our family living room with my father holding her left hand and my sister holding her right, and Wendell standing at the foot of the bed and me at the doorway, because I had been the one who had been driving back and forth to the airport to pick up the rest of the family. My mother had been a music teacher in the public schools for 34 years. She had played the cello. She had loved my father in a way I have not, in my own 41 years, ever fully been able to describe. She had been the kind of wife who would notice my father coming home from the hospital after a difficult surgery and would put her cello away mid-practice and go meet him in the kitchen and pour him a glass of wine without him saying a word. They had been the kind of marriage that other people, when they saw it, sometimes envied. They had also been the kind of marriage that, when one of them died, left the other one a kind of half-person. My father, after my mother died, was a half-person. We did not, in the first year after her death, fully understand what that was going to mean. Florencia Castelli came into our father's life in the spring of 2013, 16 months after our mother's funeral. She was, at the time, 47. He was 60. She had been the hostess at a restaurant in Tarrytown where our father had taken to eating dinner alone 3 nights a week because he could not stand to eat in his own kitchen. She had, by her own account, been kind to him. She had brought him an extra piece of bread when he came in. She had remembered his name. She had asked him how his week had been. My father, who was a man who had not been asked how his week was by a woman who was not my mother in 37 years, had begun to look forward to those dinners. He had begun to talk to Florencia at the host stand for longer than was usual. He had, by August of 2013, asked her to dinner outside of the restaurant. She had said yes. By November of 2013, they were engaged. By February of 2014, they were married at the county courthouse, with no children invited, no announcement made beforehand, and a small reception at the same restaurant where they had met. Wendell, Constance, and I had found out about the wedding from my father in a phone call after it had happened. He had said, "Adelaide, I have some news. Florencia and I got married yesterday. I should have told you. I am sorry. I did not want to fuss. I had been on the phone in my own kitchen, 200 miles north. I had not said anything for 1 second. I had then said, 'Dad, I am happy for you. We will come down to meet her this weekend.' I had hung up. I had called Wendell. I had said when Dad got married. Florencia, the hostess from the restaurant. Yesterday. Wendell had said, 'Adelaide, are you sitting down?' I had said, 'Yes.' He had said, 'I have something to tell you.' Florencia's last name is Castelli. There was a woman named Florencia Castelli in our father's hospital community 20 years ago. She had a brief affair with a chief of surgery who is 30 years older than her. The man's wife found out. The man left his wife. The man also left Florencia 8 months later, after his own assets had been substantially restructured by his divorce attorney. I do not know if it is the same Florencia Castelli. I will find out. Do not tell Dad. Do not say anything to Florencia. I will call you on Tuesday." Wendell hung up. I had stood in my kitchen for 11 minutes, without moving. I had thought, for the first time in my life, that I might have to be careful with my own father in a way I had never been careful before. It was the same Florencia Castelli. Wendell confirmed it 3 days later. He had called an old family friend named Ezra Whitlatch, who had been the head of cardiology at our father's hospital and who had retired in 2017 but who in 2014 had still been working. Ezra had been, in addition to a colleague, one of my father's closest friends for 40 years. Ezra had taken Wendell's call. Ezra had said, "Wendell, I am going to tell you what I know. I want you to understand that I love your father, and I have been quiet about this because I have not known what to do with the information. The woman your father just married is the same woman who had an affair with Marcus Friedlander in 1994. I do not know what happened to her after that. I know she moved to the Hudson Valley sometime in the 2000s. I know she has been working in restaurants. I know your father has been going to that particular restaurant for almost 2 years. I want to tell you something, Wendell. I do not know if Florencia knew who your father was when he started coming in. I do not know if she recognized his name. I do know that she would have been able to figure it out within 5 minutes. Your father's name was in the medical community here for 30 years. He is, in this area, a known person. She would have known who she was being kind to. I am not telling you this to be cruel. I am telling you this because your father is my friend, and I think you and your sisters need to know what we may be looking at. Wendell had thanked him. He had hung up. He had called me. He had called Constance. The three of us had had a long conference call that Sunday afternoon. We had decided, on that call, that we were not going to confront our father. We were going to do what we always did when our father made a decision we did not like. We were going to be patient. We were going to be respectful. We were going to be there for him. And we were going to start, very quietly, paying attention. We paid attention for 11 years. I want to tell you what that looked like. We were not surveilling Florencia. We did not hire investigators. We did not break into her things. We were simply, the three of us, the children of a man who had been the calm and exacting center of our lives for our entire childhoods, paying the kind of attention that I think is the gift you can give to a parent who is making a decision you are worried about. We came to dinner. We were warm to Florencia. We were respectful. We invited her to our weddings, our children's baptisms, our holiday gatherings. We sent her thank you notes when she sent us Christmas cards. We did not, in 11 years, do or say anything that would have allowed her to feel that we did not accept her. We were also, in those 11 years, doing one other thing. We were keeping a quiet running record of the things she said and did when she did not think we were watching. The way she had, in 2015, suggested to my father that he should sell the house and move to a smaller place. The way she had, in 2017, suggested that he should reorganize his retirement accounts under a single advisor she happened to know. The way she had, in 2019, accidentally referred to a piece of jewelry my mother had left to Constance as my emerald ring at a Thanksgiving dinner. The way she had, in 2020, gently suggested to my father that his estate plan was probably out of date and should be reviewed. The way she had, in 2022, when my father had had a small heart event that had turned out to be nothing, said in the waiting room to Wendell, I want you to know that whatever happens, I am going to take care of your father, and the family business is going to be managed appropriately. Wendell had not asked her what the family business meant. The family business had not been anything my father had been involved with for 11 years. My father had been retired since 2015. Wendell had nodded. Wendell had filed the comment away. We had been filing comments away for 11 years. By 2024, the three of us had a shared document. The document was a Google Doc. The document had a careful, neutral title that referenced our recipe collection. The document had, by the year our father got sick, 87 pages of notes. I want to tell you about one specific evening that I have thought about a great many times in the months since our father died. It was a Saturday in October of 2019. We had been at the house for our father's 66th birthday. There had been a small dinner. Wendell and his wife, Constance and her husband, my then husband and me, and the kids. Florencia had hosted. She had made a beef tenderloin. She had set the table beautifully. She had spent the day preparing. The meal had been kind. She had been, that night, the version of herself that I think had genuinely been fond of my father. After dinner, she had carried the cake out herself. She had set it down in front of my father. She had kissed his cheek. She had said, in front of the entire family, Whitaker, I have loved you so much. I want you to know that everything I have in this life is because of you. My father had smiled. He had looked at her with the soft fondness of a man who, late in his life, had been given a second comfortable companionship. He had said, Florencia, my dear, thank you. I had been watching from across the table. I had heard the sentence the way I had heard most of Florencia's sentences for 6 years by then. I had heard the surface. I had also heard, just underneath it, the second meaning. Everything I have in this life is because of you. Not I love you. Not I am grateful for our years together. Not, you are the man I have chosen to spend the rest of my life with. Everything I have in this life is because of you. The phrasing had been transactional. It had been transactional in the unconscious way that confirms a fact, rather than in the conscious way that performs one. I had not said anything that night. I had picked up my fork. I had eaten my cake. After the meal, I had walked out to the back garden with Wendell. I had said, "Did you hear what she said?" Wendell had said, "Yes." I had said, "Did you hear it the way I heard it?" Wendell had said, "Adelaide, yes." We had stood in the garden for a long minute. We had not said anything else. There had been nothing else to say. We had gone back inside. We had been warm to Florencia for the rest of the evening. We had been warm for another 6 years. The warmth had been the work. The warmth had been the love. The love had been for our father. The warmth, in the end, had been our way of letting him have, for 11 years, a wife he had chosen, while we had been quietly building, in the background, the architecture he had asked us to be ready for. I want to pause here for a second. If you have ever spent 11 years being kind to a person who you suspected of being kind to your parent for reasons you did not trust, then you know what that long, careful quiet costs. If this story is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are getting to the part that turned. In April of 2025, our father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis had come quickly. He had been losing weight. He had gone in for a routine scan in March. The scan had been not routine. He had been told, in early April, that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer with metastases to his liver and that the prognosis was, at best, 3 to 6 months. He had called me first. He had called me before he had called Florencia. He had said, "Adelaide, I need to tell you something. I am going to die. I want to ask you to come down. I want you to bring your brother and sister. I have things I want to talk about. I do not want Florencia in the conversation. I'm going to tell her I am taking the 3 of you out for a long lunch. Will you come?"
I had said, "Dad."
"We will be there tomorrow." We had been there the next day. We had had lunch with our father at a small Italian restaurant 20 miles from his house, while Florencia had been at her own sister's house for the day. Our father had laid out, over the course of that 3-hour lunch, what he wanted us to know. He had a prenuptial agreement with Florencia. He had not told her, ever, that the prenuptial agreement existed. The prenup had been drafted by his attorney in 2013, before the wedding, in the form of a post-nuptial agreement that Florencia had been told was a routine asset disclosure for tax purposes. She had signed it. She had not, at the time, asked the questions she should have asked. The agreement specified that in the event of either divorce or death, Florencia would receive a lump sum settlement of $250,000, the contents of one specific account in her name only, and the use of the house in the Hudson Valley for 6 months following his death. She would not receive any portion of his retirement accounts, his investment accounts, his pension, the house itself, the contents of the house, his medical practice's residual value, or his interest in a small medical real estate partnership that, my father said quietly, was worth approximately $4.2 million. The bulk of his estate, which my father estimated at $7.8 million plus the house, would pass through trust to me, Wendell, and Constance in equal thirds, with a specific allocation set aside for our children's education. My father had said, at lunch, "Children, I want you to understand something. I loved your mother. I have loved you 3 since the day each of you was born. I have been, for the past 11 years, fond of Florencia. I am not under any illusion about who Florencia is, or what brought her into my life. I am not naive. I have known for 11 years exactly what she was hoping for. I have given her a comfortable life. I have not given her access to your inheritance. The prenup is going to be the protection. The lawyer who drafted it is named Quentin Fairchild. His office is in Tarrytown. I have given him instructions for what to do when I die. I want the 3 of you to meet with him next week. He is going to walk you through everything." Wendell had set down his fork. He had said, "Dad, does Florencia know about the prenup?" Our father had said, "No. She has never asked to see it again since the day she signed it. She has not, I believe, remembered what she signed. She signed it 11 years ago. She has been, for the most part, in a kind of comfortable agreement with herself that whatever I have, she has access to. I have allowed her to believe that because correcting her would have required a conversation I did not want to have. The conversation is going to happen after I am gone. It is not going to be a conversation I have to have. It is, I am sorry to say, going to be a conversation the three of you have to have. I am going to make it as easy on you as I can. That is what Quentin is for. Our father got sicker, quickly. By June he was in home hospice. Florencia had been, for the first 3 weeks, attentive. She had been the wife in the role she had been performing for 11 years. By the 4th week, however, she had begun to ask questions about the estate. She had asked my father, in our hearing, in his bedroom, whether they had ever updated his will. She had asked him whether he wanted to discuss the house. She had asked him, gently, whether there were any accounts he wanted to add her name to. My father had said, each time, Florencia, my dear, we will talk about it later. I am tired. Florencia had not pushed in those moments. She had walked out of the room. She had then, over the following 4 weeks, become increasingly distant. She had begun spending nights at her sister's house. She had begun, by late August, to wear different clothes. She had begun, by early September, to take long phone calls in the garden. I had not eavesdropped. I had not needed to. I had been watching for 11 years. By the end of September, I had understood, the way you understand without confirming, that Florencia was preparing to leave. I had told Wendell. I had told Constance. We had been ready. We had been ready since the lunch in April. Florencia filed for divorce on a Friday morning in October. She had retained an attorney who I would later learn was named Marston Greer, a man in his late 50s who specialized in what he called late-life family transitions, and who, by his own marketing materials, had built a substantial practice representing second wives in proceedings against the estates of their wealthy older husbands. Florencia had filed for divorce while my father was actively dying. She had filed because she had been told, by Marston Greer, that filing while my father was still living would give her access to spousal alimony and to discovery rights into the marital estate, both of which would be foreclosed if my father died first. She had been told that the divorce would, at minimum, give her a settlement substantially larger than the will would. She had not, when she filed, known that the will was not the operative document. The prenup was. She had not, when she filed, known that we had a copy of the prenup. We had had a copy since the meeting with Quentin Fairchild in April. We had been, for 6 months, ready. My father died 11 days after Florencia filed. He died on a Wednesday morning at 9:51 a.m. with the 3 of us in the room and Dilys the hospice nurse in the doorway. Florencia had not, that morning, come back from her sister's house. She had been there since late the night before. She had been told by Dilys at 5:30 a.m. that morning that he was actively dying. She had not driven over. She had called her attorney instead, I would later learn, at 5:42 a.m., to ask whether dying during a pending divorce changed anything about the proceedings. Marston Greer had told her, at 5:48 a.m., that he would need to research the question. He had researched it. He had called her back at 11:14 that morning. He had said, Mrs. Norton, I am sorry. I have spoken with opposing counsel. There is a prenuptial agreement that we were not aware of. The prenup is, I am sorry to say, dispositive on most of the questions we were planning to litigate. Your divorce petition is going to be rendered moot by his death. You are going to receive the settlement specified in the prenup. We are not going to be able to litigate further. I am sorry to be the one to tell you. Florencia had hung up on him, I am told. She had then driven to the house. She had arrived at 11:51 a.m. My father was already gone. Wendell, Constance, and I were sitting in the living room. Quentin Fairchild was on his way over. Florencia had walked in. She had looked at the 3 of us. She had said, Adelaide, I need to speak with you. I had said, Florencia,
Sit down.
Quentin is going to be here in 14 minutes. I think it is best if we wait for him. Florencia had sat down. She had not said anything for the next 14 minutes. Quentin had arrived at 12:06. He was 68. He had been my father's attorney for 31 years. He had a leather satchel and a small steel watch and an expression that was, in this moment, the careful, neutral expression of a man who had been waiting 11 years to deliver a piece of news. He sat down across from Florencia. He said, "Mrs. Norton, I am so sorry for your loss. I would like to walk you through some documents. I would prefer to do this in private if you would like, but I would also like to make the children aware that I will be doing so in their family home, and they may be in earshot regardless. Would you prefer that we go to my office?" Florencia had said, "Quentin, just tell me what the situation is." Quentin had opened his satchel. He had pulled out the prenuptial agreement. He had set it on the coffee table. He had said, "Mrs. Norton, this is the prenuptial agreement that you signed on January 14th, 2014, 3 weeks before your wedding to my late client. The agreement was drafted by my firm. The agreement has been reviewed and updated twice during the marriage, in 2018 and 2022, with your signed acknowledgement on file at each review. The agreement specifies that in the event of either divorce or death, your settlement is $250,000, the contents of an account in your name only, which currently holds approximately $84,000, and the use of the family home for a period of 6 months following the death of my client. You have been receiving statements on the account in your name only at this address, monthly, since 2014. I want to confirm that you have received those statements." Florencia had not said anything. She had looked at the prenup on the coffee table. Quentin had said, "Mrs.
Norton,
I want to confirm that you have received those statements." Florencia had said, very small, "Yes." Quentin had nodded. He had said, "The prenup has been on file with my office since 2014. You signed it in front of myself, my late client, and an independent attorney who represented you, a Mr. Kendrick Talbot, whose signature is on the bottom of the document. I want to confirm that you remember meeting with Mr. Talbot before signing." Florencia had not said anything. Quentin had said again, "Mrs. Norton." Florencia had said, "I remember." Quentin had nodded. He had said, "Mrs. Norton, the settlement specified in this agreement is what you will receive. I am authorized to deliver it to you within 14 days. The bulk of my client's estate, as he directed, will pass to his 3 children in equal thirds, with provisions for their children, through the Whitaker-Norton Family Trust, which was established in 2014 and which has been the vehicle for his estate planning since that time. I would like to give you a copy of this agreement and the trust documentation to take to your attorney for review. I will let myself out." He had stood up. He had handed Florencia the documents. He had walked out. The 4 of us had sat in the living room. Florencia had not said anything for a long minute. Then she had said, "Adelaide, Wendell, Constance, I am so sorry." I had said, "Florencia, thank you for saying that. Please take the time you need to leave. You have 6 months. We are not going to rush you. We will be in touch through Quentin's office about any practical matters. I would prefer if we did not have other conversations between now and then." Florencia had nodded. She had stood up. She had walked upstairs. She had been there, in the room she had shared with my father, for 47 minutes. She had come down with a small overnight bag. She had said, "I am going to my sister's. I will come back for the rest later." She had walked out. I had not seen her since. If you have ever sat in a living room with a woman who had spent 11 years performing a marriage in your father's house and watched her receive, in front of you, the news that she had not been the wife she had been telling herself she had been, then you know what that quiet costs. If this is hitting close, drop a comment. Subscribe if you have not. We are at the part that I want to tell you carefully because it has been the part that has surprised me most. The settlement was completed within 14 days, as Quentin had said it would be. Florencia received the $250,000 and the contents of her account, for a total of approximately $334,000. She moved out of the house in late November, ahead of the 6-month deadline, which I think was a kindness she gave herself more than us. She moved, I am told, through quiet channels to her sister's house in the next county. Marston Greer, her attorney, attempted in early November to challenge the prenup on the grounds that it had been signed under duress. The challenge was, after Quentin's response and the submission of the 2018 and 2022 acknowledgments, withdrawn. Florencia had been, in the end, what she had been all along. A woman who had been hoping for more than she was entitled to, and who had spent 11 years arranging her life around the assumption that she would, eventually, receive it. She had been wrong. She had been wrong, in part, because she had underestimated the children of the man she had married. She had also been wrong because she had underestimated the man she had married. My father had been, until his last breath, a calm, exacting man. He had been the man my mother had loved for 37 years. He had been the same man in the bedroom, with his hand in mine on a Wednesday morning at 9:51 a.m. The only thing about him that had changed in 14 years of being a widower had been the address on his mail. He had been, the entire time, fully himself. A year and 7 months after my father's death, this is where we are. Wendell, Constance, and I split the estate the way our father directed. The proceeds were considerable. Each of us has placed a portion into our own children's education trusts. Each of us has, with Quentin's guidance, made specific charitable contributions in our father's name. Wendell endowed a chair at our father's hospital in cardiothoracic surgery, named for our mother. Constance funded a small music scholarship at the elementary school where our mother had taught for 17 years. I established a research grant at the University Medical School where our father had trained, to be awarded annually to a third-year medical student who, in the words of the grant criteria, demonstrates a particular combination of clinical precision and human warmth. The first recipient was a young woman named Marisol Tovar. I attended the ceremony. I shook her hand. I had thought, when I had been planning the grant, that I had been honoring my father. I had understood in the moment Marisol had thanked me that I had also been thanking my father, which is, in some ways, the same thing. We do, with the money parents leave us, the work of saying back to them the things we did not have time to say before they were gone. The money is, in this sense, a language. The money is, in the end, a way of being grateful out loud. The three of us have become, in the months since our father died, closer than we have ever been. We were not, as adult siblings, distant. We had been warm to each other through our 30s. We had been the kind of siblings who exchanged holiday cards and called each other on birthdays and visited each other's houses every 2 years. We had not, however, been close in the way I had heard other siblings describe being close. We had been 3 independent adults who happened to be related. Our father's illness and the 11 weeks of hospice and the morning of his death and the 18 months since have changed that. Wendell and I now talk on the phone twice a week. Constance flies up to see me every 6 weeks. We have been, in our way, the 3 children our parents raised, who have only now, in our 40s, fully discovered each other as the adults we had been busy becoming for the past 20 years. I had not known, before our father died, that he and our mother had been the connecting tissue of our sibling relationship. I had not known that when the tissue is gone, we would need to rebuild it ourselves, on our own terms, with our own materials. The materials, it turned out, were time and attention. We have had both. We have used both. The sibling relationship I have with Wendell and Constance now is the relationship I think my parents had been hoping we would build all along after they were gone. The fact that it took their being gone for us to build it is a particular kind of grief. The fact that we have built it is a particular kind of gift. Both can be true. Both are. The house in the Hudson Valley is mine now. Wendell and Constance both have houses elsewhere. They did not want this one. They came to a small meeting at Quentin's office in February and signed their interests over to me. I have been living in it for 11 months. I have changed almost nothing. The cedar trees my mother planted in 1989 are still there. They are 18 feet tall. They are, in October, the most beautiful trees in the county. My father's surgical books are still on the shelves in his study. I have not read them. I am not going to. They are not for me. They are for him. They are staying where he left them. I have not remarried. I had divorced my first husband 3 years before my father died, which is a story I do not need to tell here, because that divorce was not the one that taught me what I am trying to teach you in this story. The divorce that taught me was Florencia's. Florencia's divorce taught me that the work of being a daughter does not end when your parents start making decisions you would not have made. The work, in fact, becomes harder. The work becomes the work of staying close, of being kind, of paying attention without surveillance, of being there at the lunch in April when your father wants to tell you what is going to happen, of being there at 5:23 in the morning when the hospice nurse calls you and the cedars are not yet lit by the sun, and your father needs you to bring the things he asked you to bring. The work of being a daughter is the work of trust. The work of trust, with a parent who has remarried late, is the work of being on your father's side without being against the woman he has chosen. I was, for 11 years, on my father's side. I was never, in those 11 years, openly against Florencia. I was, in fact, kind to her.
I was kind to her at every holiday. I was kind to her on every birthday.
I was kind to her when she sent the Christmas card every year that did not mention my mother's name. The kindness was not insincere. The kindness was a structure. The structure was what allowed our father to live, for 11 years, in a house that contained a wife he had chosen, 3 children who had not chosen her, and a quiet protective layer that he and Quentin had built around our inheritance that none of us had needed to enforce until the day after he died. The kindness was the work. The work was the love. The cardinal that visits the bird feeder my mother put up in 1991 still comes. He has been coming, by my count, for more than 3 decades. I do not know if it is the same cardinal. Birds do not live 3 decades. I know it is some cardinal. I know the species has been continuous in this yard since the year I was 12. My mother, the year before she died, told me once that she had loved that bird feeder more than almost any other object in the house. She had said, "Adelaide, I do not know what is going to happen after I am gone. I want you to know that whatever happens, the feeder stays. Even if your father remarries. Even if he sells the house. The feeder stays. Promise me." I had promised her. I had been 27. I had not understood, at 27, what I was promising. I had understood only that my mother loved a bird, and that I was being asked to make sure the bird could keep finding seed. I have kept the promise. The feeder is in the same place it has been since 1991. The cardinal still comes. He brings a female, as I think every cardinal in these stories does. They take what they want. They fly away. They come back. My mother, the year she planted the cedars, had told my father that she wanted them to grow to be tall enough to be the first thing anyone saw when they turned onto the property. They are. They have been tall enough for a long time. I have not, in 11 months in this house, taken any of them down. I am not going to. If you made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched a parent make a decision after a loss that you did not understand and decided, instead of fighting them, to be patient with them? Drop a comment. Tell me what you learned. Tell me how long you waited. Tell me whether the patience was worth it in the end. I read every single one. I mean that. I want to say one last thing. To the children of widowers and widows who have remarried and who are listening to this with some specific person in mind. The work is not to be the daughter who is right. The work is to be the daughter who is present. The work is the lunch in April. The work is the bird feeder. The work is being there, kindly, for 11 years, while the rest of the architecture quietly does what it was built to do. Trust the architecture your parent built. Trust your parent. Be kind to the person they chose. Be patient. The decisions of older people in the end almost always come into focus, given enough time. You do not, in those 11 years, have to be the person who is making the focus happen. You only have to be the person who is still in the room when it does. If you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. There are more stories like this on this channel. The link is in the description. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for being here.